The rain had been falling all evening over the city, soft but steady, turning the streets into ribbons of reflected light. Inside one of Manhattan's quieter, more expensive restaurants where the booths were deep, the wine list longer than most novels, and the staff trained to disappear unless needed, a man sat alone at a corner table waiting. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, but he didn't look relaxed. His fingers tapped lightly against the polished wood, eyes fixed on the door. He wasn't just any businessman. He was the kind of person whose name showed up in headlines, whose company had changed how millions interacted with technology. But tonight he wasn't thinking about innovation or stock prices. He was about to sign a deal that would hand over control of the very thing he'd spent 10 years building from his garage into a global powerhouse. It felt like the logical next step: more capital, more reach, more influence. His advisors had assured him it was a win. The restaurant wasn't packed, but it hummed with quiet energy. A few other tables held people in similar situations. Hushed conversations, folders passed under the table, glasses raised in silent agreement. The staff moved like shadows, efficient and unseen. Among them was a young woman in a crisp black uniform, her hair pulled back neatly, eyes sharp but kind. She'd been working double shifts all week, juggling this job with night classes and hospital visits. Her younger brother had been sick for months, and every dollar counted. She didn't have time for drama, but she had a habit of listening, really listening, when people spoke, even when they thought no one was paying attention. As she approached the billionaire's table to refill his water glass, she caught a few words from the men who had just joined him. They were smooth-talking, confident, dressed in tailored suits that screamed, "We own the room." One of them slid a thick document across the table. "Just the final term sheet," he said with a practiced smile. "Standard stuff." "We're excited to move forward." The billionaire nodded, reaching for a pen. That's when she heard it, the phrase that made her pause. Non-compete clause, perpetual IP assignment. It wasn't the first time she'd heard language like that. Last summer, while volunteering at a legal aid clinic for low-income families, she'd helped an elderly shop owner review a lease agreement. Buried in page 7 was nearly identical wording, designed to look routine but actually giving away ownership of everything the man had built over 40 years. He'd almost signed it before they caught it. Her stomach tightened. She watched as the billionaire flipped through the pages quickly, his expression unreadable. His lawyers had already approved it. His team had given the green light. But something about the way the other men exchanged glances, just a flicker of satisfaction, told her this wasn't as standard as they claimed. She took a breath. She knew the rules. Don't interrupt, don't speak unless spoken to, especially not to guests like this. But the image of that old shop owner, standing in his empty store after losing everything, flashed in her mind. And she thought of her brother, waiting for treatment she couldn't afford if she lost this job over one reckless moment. Still, she couldn't stay silent. As she leaned in to pour more water, her voice dropped so low only he could hear it. "Don't sign this." The words slipped out before she could second-guess them. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the glass, her hand steady, as if she'd just commented on the weather. But inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. The billionaire froze. The pen hovered midair. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see her, really see her for the first time, not as part of the background, but as a person. Her eyes met his for half a second, clear, urgent, no trace of fear or agenda. "Just warning," he didn't respond. Didn't nod. Didn't frown. But he set the pen down. "Give me a moment," he said to the men at the table, his voice calm but firm. "I need to step outside." They exchanged puzzled glances but nodded politely. "Of course," one said, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The young woman walked away, hands trembling slightly now that the moment had passed. She told herself it was done. She'd said her piece. If he ignored it, that was on him. If he got angry, she'd deal with it tomorrow. Right now, she had 3 more tables to serve and a bus to catch before midnight. Outside, the rain had let up. The billionaire stood under the awning, pulling out his phone. He dialed his personal attorney, the one he'd trusted for over a decade. "Hey," he said, voice low. "That term sheet with Sterling Capital. I need you to walk me through Clause 14B again, word for word." There was a pause on the other end. Then carefully, "It's just the standard IP assignment, Daniel. We reviewed it together last week. But it says perpetual, irrevocable, and exclusive rights to all current and future derivatives. Is that normal? Another pause. Longer this time. Well, in deals of this size, yes. It protects their investment. He frowned. It also means I lose control of the core algorithm, the one I wrote myself. Forever. It's part of the package, the attorney said. A little too quickly. Something in the tone, the slight defensiveness, set off another alarm. He thanked the lawyer and hung up. Back inside, he didn't return to the table right away. Instead, he stood near the host stand, watching the young waitress move between tables with quiet efficiency. She wasn't showy, didn't flirt or oversmile, just did her job with dignity, and yet she'd risked everything to say 3 words to a stranger. He thought about how many people in his life told him what he wanted to hear, how many nodded along while deals were made that benefited everyone but him. And here was someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose telling him the truth. When he finally sat back down, he folded the document and placed it aside. "I've decided to hold off on signing tonight," he said smoothly. "I'd like my legal team to do one final review. You understand?" The investors masked their frustration well, but their body language shifted, shoulders stiffening, smiles tightening at the edges. "Of course," one said. Due diligence is wise, but the billionaire wasn't thinking about them anymore. He was thinking about the woman who'd whispered those words like a lifeline. And for the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Doubt, not in himself, but in the system he'd trusted blindly. The dinner ended politely, with handshakes and promises to reconnect soon. As the investors left, the billionaire lingered. He watched the waitress clear the table, stacking plates with care. He wanted to thank her, but he didn't know how, not yet, so he simply left a generous tip, more than she'd ever seen, and walked out into the cool night, the city lights blinking like distant stars. Behind him, she found the envelope tucked under her order pad. Inside was enough to cover her brother's next round of treatment, and a small note. Handwritten, "Thank you for seeing what others missed." She stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it carefully into her pocket. She didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. He couldn't sleep, even after hours of tossing in his penthouse bed. Staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that dinner, the words kept circling in his head like a song he couldn't turn off. Don't sign this. It wasn't just the warning itself. It was the way she'd said it. No hesitation, no fear. Like she was handing him a truth he'd been too busy, too powerful, or too trusting to see on his own. And that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. By 3 a.m., he gave up. He padded barefoot into his home office, the city light stretching out below like a sea of tiny stars. He pulled up the digital copy of the term sheet on his laptop, the one his legal team had cleared without a second thought. He'd skimmed it before, trusted the experts, as he always did, but now he read it slowly, line by line, like he was decoding a foreign language. At first, it all sounded normal. Investment amount, board seats, reporting requirements. But then he got to Section 14B, the part about intellectual property. His eyes narrowed. All current and future derivatives of the core algorithm, including source code, training data, and conceptual frameworks, shall be assigned exclusively and irrevocably to the investor entity. He read it again, and again, his stomach dropped. This wasn't just about sharing profits or giving up a little control. This clause meant that once he signed, he wouldn't just be selling a piece of his company. He'd be handing over the very heart of it. The algorithm he'd coded alone in his garage during sleepless nights. The one that had changed how people searched, learned, even connected. And not just that version, the future versions too. Anything he or his team built from it forever would belong to them. He leaned back, stunned. How had his own lawyers missed this? Or worse, had they seen it and said nothing? He grabbed his phone and called his lead counsel again, this time not as a casual check-in but with real questions. "Explain to me," he said, voice low but firm, "why this clause gives away perpetual ownership of my IP. Isn't that extreme?" There was a long pause. Then carefully, "In high-stakes deals like this, it's not uncommon. They're protecting their capital. You still retain operational control and the brand stays yours. But the code, the actual brain of the company, goes to them, Well, technically, yes. But they'd never interfere. It's just legal formality, he repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. If I can't improve or adapt my own technology without their permission, how is that control? The lawyer hesitated. Look, these are standard terms for this tier of investment. If you walk away, they'll take their money elsewhere, and you'll lose the funding you need to scale. That was the thing. He did need the money. His company was growing fast, but competitors were closing in. Without this capital, he might fall behind. So the pressure had been real. And maybe that's exactly what they'd counted on. His urgency, his trust, his assumption that his team had his back. He ended the call, feeling a cold knot form in his chest. For the first time in years, he questioned not just a deal, but the people around him. Meanwhile, across the city, in a small apartment with peeling paint and a flickering hallway light, the young waitress was just getting home. Her feet ached, her back stiff from hours on the floor, but she didn't complain. She never did. She checked on her brother first, still asleep, breathing steady, the IV line taped neatly to his arm. She kissed his forehead, then collapsed onto the couch, too tired to even change out of her uniform. She thought about the billionaire for a moment, wondered if he'd signed anyway. Probably had. People like him didn't listen to people like her. And that was okay. She'd done what she could. Her conscience was clear. But back in the penthouse, the billionaire wasn't sleeping. He was digging deeper. He pulled up public records, old lawsuits, news articles about the investment firm. What he found chilled him. 2 years ago, they'd backed a clean energy startup. 6 months after the deal closed, they invoked a similar IP clause to seize control of the company's battery tech, then shut down the original team and licensed the patent to a competitor. The founder ended up bankrupt, his name erased from the project he'd invented. Another case, a food tech company. Same pattern, same language, same outcome. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a strategy. Find hungry, brilliant founders, offer them the world. Then quietly take everything they built. He felt sick. Not just angry, betrayed. He'd been so focused on growth, on legacy, on proving he could play with the big leagues that he'd walked right into a trap dressed as an opportunity. The next morning, he canceled all meetings. Instead, he called an emergency session with his inner circle, but not the usual advisors. He brought in an outside forensic contract lawyer, someone with no ties to his current team. Within hours, she confirmed his worst fears. The clause was intentionally vague, designed to be interpreted broadly, and nearly impossible to challenge once signed. This isn't just aggressive, she said bluntly. It's predatory. He sat in silence for a long time after she left. Then he made a decision he wouldn't sign. Not now, not ever, but that wasn't enough. He needed to know. How had that waitress seen it so clearly? His own legal department, filled with Ivy League graduates and six-figure salaries, had glossed over it. Yet someone working double shifts studying law at night had spotted the danger in seconds. He went back to the restaurant the next evening, hoping to find her. But the hostess told him she wasn't scheduled until the weekend. He didn't leave. He sat at the same corner table, ordered a coffee, and waited. When the manager came by, he asked gently, "Do you know her?" "The one who served me last night?" The manager, cautious but polite, nodded. "Yeah, she's one of our best. Quiet but sharp. Always notices if someone's having a rough day. Does she have any background in law?" "Not officially. But she volunteers at that legal aid place downtown. Helps people read leases and contracts. Says she's studying to be a paralegal." That explained it. She hadn't just guessed. She'd recognized the pattern. He left the restaurant that night with a new kind of respect, not just for her, but for the kind of wisdom that doesn't come from boardrooms or fancy degrees. It comes from watching people get hurt, from caring enough to pay attention. Back home, he drafted a short email to his board. "We are terminating discussions with Sterling Capital. Their terms are unacceptable and potentially harmful to our long-term mission." He hit send before he could overthink it. Then he did something else. He pulled up the legal aid organization's website and made a donation, enough to fund their contract review program for a year. He didn't attach his name. Just a note. For the people who read the fine print so others don't lose everything. He still didn't know what he'd say to her when he saw her again. But he knew one thing for sure. Her whisper hadn't just saved his company. It had woken him up. And in a world where everyone told him yes, that single no had been the most valuable thing he'd heard in years. He didn't just want to thank her. He needed to understand her. It wasn't enough to know she'd spotted the trap. He wanted to know how she saw what so many others, paid handsomely to see it, had missed. There was something in her quiet certainty that stayed with him, like a melody he couldn't shake. So he went back to the restaurant again, this time during the day when it was empty and the staff was prepping for dinner. He asked the manager if he could speak with her, but was told she only worked evenings and weekends. He left his number but didn't push. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. Still, he couldn't let it go. A few days later, he called the legal aid office she volunteered at. Not as a billionaire, but as someone looking for help reviewing a lease just to cover. When the receptionist answered, he asked casually if a certain waitress from the downtown restaurant still volunteered there. The woman on the line hesitated, then said, "We don't give out volunteer info, sorry." He respected that. But before hanging up, he added, "If she comes in, could you just tell her? Someone from the restaurant the other night would like to talk. No pressure. Just to say thank you." A week passed. No word. He started to think maybe she didn't want to be found. Maybe she'd seen his face in the news and decided keeping her distance was smarter. He couldn't blame her. Then on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, his assistant buzzed him. "There's a young woman here. Says you've been trying to reach her. She doesn't have an appointment." His heart jumped. Send her in. When she walked through the door, she looked exactly as he remembered. Calm, composed, wearing a simple coat and carrying a worn backpack. No nervous fidgeting, no wide-eyed awe at the sleek office or the view of the skyline. Just quiet dignity. He stood up. "Thank you for coming," she nodded. "I wasn't sure I should, but I figured if you went through all that trouble, it must be important." "It is," he said. "Please sit." They talked for a while, about nothing at first. The weather, the city, how hard it was to find good coffee that didn't cost $10. He wanted her to relax, to feel like this wasn't an interview or an interrogation. Slowly, she did. Then he asked the question that had been burning in him. "How did you know?" "About the contract, I mean. You saw it for maybe 10 seconds. My lawyer spent days on it." She looked down for a moment, then met his eyes. "I've seen that kind of language before. Not in tech deals, but in apartment leases, small business loans, even cell phone contracts. People who don't have lawyers get handed papers full of fine print that sounds official, but really just takes away their rights. I helped an old man last year who almost signed away his storefront because of a clause just like the one you were about to sign. He'd run that shop for 40 years. After we caught it, he cried. Said no one had ever read it with him before." Her voice was steady, but there was pain underneath it, the kind that comes from watching good people get hurt by systems they don't understand. "I didn't know who you were when I saw you," she went on. "But I saw the way those men were talking, how eager they were for you to sign. And I saw that clause. It had the same feel, like it was dressed up to look normal, but it wasn't. So I said something. I didn't think you'd listen. I almost didn't," he admitted. "But something in your voice. It felt real. Not like you wanted anything from me." She gave a small smile. "I didn't. I just didn't want to watch someone lose everything they built." He leaned forward. "You're studying law, right?" "Paralegal studies," she corrected gently. "At night. During the day, I work at the restaurant. At night, I take care of my brother. School fits in the cracks." He didn't ask about her brother. She'd mentioned him once briefly, and the way she said it told him it was heavy. Instead, he asked, "What do you want to do with your degree?" "I want to help people read the fine print," she said simply. "So they don't get tricked. So they know their rights. Most folks don't have the time or the money to hire a lawyer, but they deserve to understand what they're signing." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "What if you could do that full time? Not just volunteering, but as your actual job?" She blinked. I don't follow." "I'm rebuilding my legal team," he said. "Not just lawyers who know how to close deals, but people who understand fairness. People who've seen how contracts can be used as weapons. I need someone like you, someone who sees the human side of the words on the page. Would you consider joining us? As a contract analyst. Full salary, full benefits, flexible hours so you can still be there for your brother." She stared at him, stunned. "You're serious?" "Completely, but I don't have a degree yet. I haven't even finished my program." "Doesn't matter," he said. "You have something more important. Judgment. And heart. I'd rather have that than another Ivy League resume that only knows how to please investors. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. Why me? Because you saw the truth when no one else did, he said. And because the world needs more people like you, not fewer. She didn't say yes right away. She asked questions about the role, the expectations, whether she'd be treated fairly in a room full of people with far more formal training. He answered honestly. No promises of easy success, just a chance to prove herself. A few days later, she accepted. Her first day at the office was quiet. Some people raised eyebrows. Others whispered, but she didn't let it rattle her. She showed up early, stayed late, asked thoughtful questions, and, most importantly, read every document like it belonged to someone's livelihood. Because to her it did. Within weeks, she flagged another issue. A partnership agreement with a data vendor that included a hidden clause allowing them to sell user information to third parties. It wasn't illegal, but it went against the company's public privacy promises. The legal team had missed it. She didn't. He called a meeting. From now on, he announced, every major contract gets reviewed by her before it goes to me. Some people bristled, but results spoke louder than titles. Soon, other departments started asking for her input, not because she had a fancy office, but because she asked the questions no one else thought to ask. Who does this hurt? Who benefits? Is this fair? And through it all, she never acted like she was above anyone. She still took the subway, still brought her own lunch in a reused container, still visited her brother every evening without fail. One afternoon, he found her in the break room staring out the window, looking tired. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just thinking. A year ago, I was serving coffee to people like you, hoping I wouldn't spill it. Now I'm helping shape the rules of the company. It's a lot, he smiled. You earned it. No, she said softly. I just spoke up when it mattered. That's all. But they both knew it was more than that. It was courage. It was care. It was the kind of quiet strength that changes things, not with noise, but with truth. And in a world full of polished answers, her honest voice was the one he trusted most. At first, it felt like a dream she was afraid to wake up from, showing up to work in a crisp blouse instead of a server's uniform, sitting in meetings where people actually listened when she spoke, getting a paycheck that didn't vanish before the month ended. But more than that, it was the quiet pride in her brother's eyes when she told him she'd landed a real office job. I knew you could do it, he'd said, weak but smiling from his hospital bed. That alone made every doubt worth it. She threw herself into the work. Not to prove she belonged, though some glances in the hallway suggested she still had to, but because she genuinely cared. She read contracts like stories, looking for the hidden endings no one talked about. And time after time she found them. A clause that let a supplier hike prices without warning, a partnership term that quietly gave away user data, a licensing deal that locked the company out of its own future innovations. Each time she flagged it. Each time her warning was right. The billionaire started calling her his truth compass. Not in front of everyone, she'd have hated that, but in private, over late-night coffee in the office kitchen. Before you, I thought contracts were just about winning, he admitted once. Now I see they're about trust and fairness, but not everyone saw it that way. Rumors began to spread. Whispers in elevators, snide comments in the break room. She's just a waitress with a lucky break. He's only keeping her around for the optics. What does she even know about high-stakes deals? She heard them, of course. She kept her head down and let her work speak for itself. But it stung, especially when a senior lawyer accidentally left a file on her desk labeled Entry-Level Review Do Not Distribute. She returned it without a word. But her hands shook. Then came the media, a business reporter, digging into why the big deal with the investment firm had fallen through. Somehow got wind of the story. Billionaire listens to Waitress, walks away from billion-dollar deal. At first, it was just a short article. Then another. Then a local news segment. Soon her face was everywhere, framed as the unlikely hero, the voice of reason in a room full of suits. She hated the attention. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to do her job. But the spotlight brought consequences. The investment firm she'd helped expose didn't take kindly to being called out. They didn't sue yet, but they started planting stories. Anonymous sources claiming she'd stolen confidential documents. that she was unqualified, that the billionaire was being manipulated by someone with no experience. One blog even dug up old social media posts of hers, innocent photos with her brother, comments about school, and twisted them to suggest she was anti-corporate and unstable. She came into the office one morning to find a printed article slipped under her door. "Can a waitress really understand billion-dollar deals?" The tone was mocking, dripping with condescension. She read it once, then crumpled it and threw it away. But that night she cried quietly so her brother wouldn't hear. The next day the billionaire called an all-hands meeting. No agenda. Just him, standing in front of the entire company, calm but firm. "I've heard some of you questioning why someone without a law degree is reviewing our contracts," he began. "Let me be clear. She's here because she sees what others miss. Because she cares more about doing what's right than what's easy. And because she saved this company from a deal that would have handed our future to people who don't share our values." He paused, scanning the room. "If you have a problem with that, maybe this isn't the place for you." The room fell silent. No one clapped, but no one whispered either. Later, he found her in her office. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. "Just tired of being the story." "You're not the story," he said gently. "You're the reason the story has a good ending." Then he surprised her again. "I've been thinking, what if we made this bigger? Not just about you and me, but about all the people out there who get overlooked. People who see things clearly but never get a seat at the table." She looked up. "What do you mean?" "I want to start a fellowship," he said, "for people like you. From community colleges, night schools, non-traditional paths. Train them in contract law, ethics, corporate responsibility. Give them real experience, real pay. A real shot." Her eyes widened. That would change lives." "It already has," he said, looking at her. "Yours." She didn't say yes right away. She thought about it for days. Not because she didn't believe in it, but because she knew how hard it was to be the first. The only one who looked like her, talked like her, came from where she came from. But then she thought of the old shop owner she'd helped, the single moms at the legal aid clinic, the students in her night class who worked 3 jobs just to afford books. If she said no, who would step up? So she said yes. They launched the program quietly at first, just 5 spots, full scholarships, mentorship, and a guaranteed internship. Applications poured in from all over the country. Veterans, single parents, former delivery drivers, people who'd been told they didn't belong in boardrooms but knew deep down they had something to offer. She helped design the curriculum. Not just legal theory, but real-world ethics. How to spot predatory language. How to ask hard questions. How to stand your ground when everyone expects you to stay quiet. And when the first group graduated, 3 of them were hired full-time, not as tokens, but as valued team members. The media tried to spin it as a feel-good story, but those who lived it knew better. It wasn't about feeling good. It was about fairness, about making room for voices that had been ignored for too long. One evening, as she packed up her desk, the billionaire stopped by. "You've changed more than this company," he said. "You've changed how we see talent," she smiled. "I just reminded you that it's everywhere. You just have to be willing to look." Outside, the city buzzed with its usual noise, but inside that office, something quieter and far more powerful had taken root. The belief that wisdom doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears a uniform, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of silence that hums with tension. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in the air like tiny sparks. At the plaintiff's table sat the billionaire, but he wasn't alone. Beside him, in a simple navy suit and with notes neatly stacked in front of her, sat the woman who'd once served him coffee. She wasn't testifying, she didn't need to. But she was there, because this case wasn't just about contracts or money. It was about respect, about making sure no one else fell into the same trap. Months earlier, after walking away from the deal, he'd done something few in his position ever dared. He sued. Not for money, but for clarity. He asked the court to declare the original term sheet void, arguing it was built on misleading terms and hidden intent. The investment firm fought back hard, calling it sour grapes, claiming he'd simply changed his mind after getting cold feet. But then came the evidence, the pattern of similar deals. The leaked internal emails where executives joked about harvesting IP from naive founders, and the testimony, of two other entrepreneurs who'd lost everything to the same language. And then there was her insight. The way she'd explained, in plain words during a deposition, how clauses like that prey on urgency and trust. People don't read every line when they're desperate, she'd said calmly. They assume the system is fair. But sometimes the fine print is where fairness goes to die. The judge ruled in their favor. The contract was declared unenforceable. Not just for him, but as a precedent that would make it harder for others to pull the same trick. After the verdict, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved forward. But when they asked the billionaire for a statement, he stepped aside and gestured to her. She saw it first, he said simply. She should speak. She hesitated, then stepped forward. This isn't about me, she began, voice steady. It's about making sure the next person, the single mom starting a bakery, the veteran launching a tech idea, the kid coding in his basement, doesn't lose their dream because someone hid the truth in page 14. The crowd fell quiet. No one expected such plain honesty. But that was her power. She didn't speak like a lawyer. She spoke like someone who'd watched good people get hurt and decided to do something about it. In the months that followed, life didn't slow down, it deepened. The fellowship program she'd helped build grew faster than anyone expected. What started with 5 students now had a waiting list of over 200. Companies from other industries reached out, asking how they could create similar pipelines. She traveled to community colleges not as a celebrity, but as proof that your past doesn't define your future, if someone's willing to give you a chance. Her brother got better. Slowly, steadily, the treatments worked. He started walking without help, then talking about going back to school himself. One evening, as they sat on their tiny fire escape sharing takeout, he looked at her and said, "You know, I used to think success meant getting rich. Now I think it means making things fairer for people like us." She smiled. That's the only kind worth having. Back at the office, things had changed too. The legal team no longer just chased deals. They asked harder questions. Is this right? Became as important as is this legal? New hires came from all walks of life. A former truck driver studying law online. A teacher who'd audited contracts for her neighborhood association. A refugee who'd rebuilt her life by learning the system from the ground up. And every one of them said the same thing. I never thought someone like me could belong here until I saw her. The billionaire, for his part, stopped chasing headlines. He focused on building a company that didn't just make money, but made a difference. He turned down lucrative partnerships that didn't align with their values. He invested in tools that helped small businesses understand contracts without hiring lawyers. And every quarter he made sure to sit down with the fellowship students, not to lecture but to listen. Then came the night of the annual charity gala. It was the kind of event usually filled with glittering dresses, expensive watches, and polite small talk. But this year felt different. On stage, under soft lights, the billionaire stepped up to the microphone. The crowd hushed, expecting another polished speech about innovation or growth. Instead, he said, "A year ago, I almost signed away everything I'd built. Not because I was foolish, but because I trusted the wrong people, and I stopped listening to the right ones." He paused, then looked out into the audience until his eyes found her. She was sitting near the back, as always, trying not to draw attention. "I was saved by someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking up," he continued. "She didn't whisper to me because she wanted a job or fame. She did it because it was the right thing to do, and that's the kind of courage we need more of, not just in business but in life." He didn't call her a hero. He didn't make her stand up or wave. He simply said, "Tonight I'm proud to call her my partner, not in title but in purpose." Later, as guests mingled, she found him near the balcony, away from the noise. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," he replied, "because the world needs to know that wisdom doesn't come from a diploma or a bank account. It comes from paying attention, from caring." She looked out at the city below, the same streets she'd walked in worn shoes, the same skyline she'd once only seen from bus windows. Now she stood here not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who'd helped reshape what was possible. A few weeks after the gala, she got a letter, not an email, an actual handwritten note on thick paper from the old shop owner she'd helped years ago. "Heard what you did," it read. "You gave me hope back then. Now you're giving it to everyone. Thank you for remembering us. She tucked the letter into her desk drawer, right next to the crumpled tip envelope from that rainy night at the restaurant. Life wasn't perfect. There were still days when she felt out of place, still moments when the weight of it all pressed down. But now she knew she wasn't alone. And more importantly, she knew her voice mattered, because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to whisper the truth, and another willing to listen.